This weekend was supposed to be untouchable. The kind of moment the WNBA has been chasing for decades. Indianapolis was ready. The league had momentum. The All-Star Game finally felt like a real event instead of a niche showcase. Cameras everywhere. Celebrities watching. Media attention higher than it had ever been. For once, it felt like everything was lining up exactly the way the league wanted. And then reality hit. Caitlin Clark, the player everyone had circled on their calendar, wasn't going to play. A groin injury sidelined her before she ever touched the floor. Fans were disappointed, sure, but injuries happen. Most people assumed the weekend would still be a celebration of how far the league had come. Behind the scenes, the players were preparing something bigger than basketball. That morning, a decision was made to wear "Pay Us What You Owe Us" shirts. The message was clear. Collective bargaining. Fair pay. A united front. This wasn't about one player or one team. It was supposed to be about everyone standing together. And for a moment, it looked like that's exactly what was happening. Veterans, rookies, stars, role players, all wearing the same message. All signaling unity. All sending the same statement to the league, the media, and the fans watching at home. But unity is fragile when egos get involved. Because while fans were focused on the shirts and the symbolism, something else was quietly brewing. A tension that had nothing to do with contracts or negotiations. A frustration that had been building long before this weekend ever started. And it didn't take long for that tension to spill out, right in front of everyone. The press conference was supposed to be routine. Players answering safe questions. Media sticking to the script. A few quotes about unity, growth, and how meaningful the moment was. Nothing controversial. Nothing personal. Until it suddenly was. Kelsey Plum started talking about the shirts. About the meeting that happened that morning. About how the decision came together. Everything sounded normal, right up until she veered off course. Almost casually, she pointed out that Team Clark wasn't there. Not just missing. 0 members present. The words landed heavy. You could feel it instantly. The room went quiet in that uncomfortable way where no one knows whether to react or pretend they didn't just hear what they heard. This wasn't a harmless observation. It wasn't necessary context. It didn't move the conversation forward. It felt like a call-out. And what made it worse was the timing. Caitlin Clark had already been ruled out. Everyone knew she was injured. Everyone knew her situation. There was no competitive advantage being gained. No point being proven. Yet the comment lingered in the air like it was meant to send a message. Plum even framed it as honesty. A quick disclaimer about not wanting to tattletale, followed immediately by doing exactly that. The kind of move that sounds innocent on the surface but feels calculated the moment it leaves your mouth. This was supposed to be a show of togetherness. Instead, it felt like someone had just drawn a line down the middle of the room. Because once those words were out, there was no walking them back. No smoothing it over. No pretending it didn't carry weight. Whether intentional or not, it painted Team Clark as outsiders, and did it publicly. And the cameras caught everything. Every pause. Every sideways glance. Every player suddenly unsure of where to look. But the most telling reaction didn't come from the reporters. It came from someone sitting close enough to touch her. Sabrina Ionescu didn't need to say anything at first. She was sitting right there, representing Team Clark, close enough that the tension couldn't be avoided. And the moment those words left Kelsey Plum's mouth, her reaction said everything the room was thinking. An eye roll. A pause. That unmistakable look of disbelief you give when someone just crossed a line for no reason. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was impossible to miss. This wasn't playful banter or competitive trash talk. This was a veteran calling out players who weren't even there to respond. And Sabrina knew exactly how it looked. Unnecessary. Petty. Completely off message. When she finally spoke, her response was sharp without being messy. Calm, but pointed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't attack. She simply made it clear that bringing it up wasn't needed. That restraint mattered. Because in moments like this, Players reveal who they are. Some chase attention. Others protect the bigger picture. Sabrina understood what the league was trying to do that weekend, and she wasn't about to let it get derailed by a stray comment. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. One player stirring tension, another shutting it down before it exploded. And fans noticed. Clips started circulating almost immediately. The eye roll, the body language, the subtle check. People weren't just reacting to what was said, they were reacting to how it was handled. Because even if you strip away the emotions, the comment still didn't make sense. And once people started digging into the details, that became impossible to ignore. Once the initial shock wore off, people started asking the obvious question. Why bring it up at all? Caitlin Clark had already been ruled out of the All-Star game before that meeting ever happened. The injury wasn't a secret. The timeline was known. She wasn't avoiding anything. She wasn't skipping out. She physically couldn't play, and her priority was recovery. That matters. Soft tissue injuries aren't something players gamble with, especially not in a league where one wrong move can cost you weeks, sometimes months. Anyone who's been around the game understands that. And the veterans understand it better than anyone. So framing Team Clark's absence like it was some kind of statement didn't line up with reality. There were logistics involved. Medical staff. Travel adjustments. Rehab schedules. All the unglamorous parts of professional sports that don't make headlines but dictate everything behind the scenes. Yet none of that was acknowledged. Instead, the focus shifted to who wasn't in the room, rather than why they weren't there. And that shift changed the entire tone of the conversation. What should have stayed about collective bargaining suddenly became personal. That's where fans started to feel the disconnect. Because from the outside, it looked like a player dealing with an injury was being subtly painted as unsupportive, despite being the biggest reason the league was even getting this level of attention in the first place. And once that realization set in, the reaction online flipped fast. Not in favor of the comment, but against it. And the next thing people noticed made the situation even more uncomfortable. The numbers. The timing couldn't have been worse. Not even a full day after Caitlin Clark was officially ruled out, the market reacted. And it reacted hard. All-Star tickets that had been selling comfortably suddenly started sliding. Then dropping. Then falling off a cliff. In less than 24 hours, prices were down nearly half. Seats that were going for over $100 were suddenly being listed for $60. Some even lower. Resale sites flooded with fans trying to cut their losses before prices dipped any further. This wasn't normal fluctuation. This wasn't last-minute hesitation. This was demand disappearing almost instantly. And it wasn't because the All-Star roster lacked talent. Every major name was still there. MVPs. Champions. Franchise faces. Players the league had spent years marketing as stars. On paper, the event should have been bulletproof. But paper doesn't buy tickets. Fans do. And fans had made it clear why they were coming. The absence of one player caused a reaction you usually only see when an entire event gets cancelled. People weren't just disappointed, they were disengaging. Quietly backing out. Choosing not to show up. That's when the conversation shifted. Because it became impossible to ignore what was right in front of everyone. One player didn't just move the needle. She was the needle. And the league felt it immediately. But if the ticket numbers were uncomfortable, what happened next was even harder to explain away. Ticket prices told one story. The TV numbers told another. When Caitlin Clark wasn't on the floor, viewership didn't dip, it collapsed. National broadcasts saw drops that couldn't be brushed off as coincidence or bad scheduling. In some cases, ratings fell by more than half. That's not noise. That's a pattern. Even her own team felt it. Games that had been pulling close to 2 million viewers suddenly struggled to break 1 million. The same roster. The same opponents. The same broadcast slots. The only difference was her absence. And when she returned, the numbers snapped right back. Millions tuning in. Peaks that rivaled major men's sporting events. Broadcast setting records the league had never touched before. At that point, the argument stopped being emotional and started being mathematical. This wasn't about hype. This wasn't about narrative. This was about measurable impact. The league wasn't just benefiting from Caitlin Clark's presence, it was depending on it. Which made the earlier call-out feel even more tone-deaf. Because the same player driving ticket sales, ratings, merchandise, and national conversation was the one being subtly questioned for not being in the room. That contradiction didn't sit well with fans. And quietly, a lot of people started thinking the same thing. If this is how the league treats its biggest draw, what's really going on behind the scenes? And then, without saying much at all, Caitlin Clark responded. Caitlin Clark didn't jump on a microphone. She didn't fire back in an interview. She didn't post a long statement or explain herself. She didn't need to. A few photos went up from All-Star Weekend. Smiling faces. Big brands. One image in particular stood out. Kelsey Plum posing in front of a Nike logo, despite being sponsored by a competing brand. Most people scrolled past it. Caitlin didn't. Her response was 6 words long. Calm. Polite. Almost playful. I appreciate the Nike advertisement. That was it. No insults. No accusations. No drama. Just a comment that quietly exposed the irony of the entire situation. The same player throwing shade was unintentionally promoting the brand Clark actually represents. It was subtle enough to seem harmless. Sharp enough to land instantly. And that's why it worked. Fans caught it immediately. Screenshots spread. Reactions poured in. Not because it was loud, but because it was smart. It showed awareness. Confidence. Control. That moment did more to shift public opinion than any press conference ever could. And if you're still here following this story, you're probably noticing how these moments stack up. How small comments reveal bigger patterns. That's why people keep coming back to conversations like this. Not for outrage, but for clarity. And if you find yourself enjoying breakdowns that actually connect the dots, sticking around makes sense. Because this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something much bigger. What made this situation linger wasn't just the comment or the clapback. It was how familiar it all felt. This wasn't the first time Caitlin Clark had been subtly minimized. And it definitely wasn't the first time fans noticed a strange tension coming from certain corners of the league. Over and over, the same pattern kept showing up. Praise her impact. Quietly. Benefit from her popularity. Openly. Downplay her importance. Publicly. That contradiction is hard to ignore once you see it. Some veterans talk about not making it about one player, while simultaneously enjoying packed arenas that didn't exist before. They push back against the attention, yet show up for the sponsorships, the TV slots, the bigger platforms that attention created. And none of this is said outright. It lives in comments like the one at that press conference. In the tone. In what's emphasized, and what's left unsaid. The resentment isn't loud. It's passive. It shows up in moments where unity should be effortless but somehow isn't. And fans aren't imagining it. Because when a league spends years struggling for visibility, and one player finally breaks through, there's an uncomfortable adjustment that follows. Not everyone handles it the same way. Some see opportunity. Others see threat. The strange part is that the success doesn't take anything away from anyone else. More eyes means more money. More attention means more leverage. More fans means more opportunity across the board. But ego doesn't always follow logic. And that's where this story stops being about Caitlin Clark versus anyone else, and starts being about how a league reacts when growth arrives faster than expected. Because some players understand that growth. And some still seem to be fighting it. This is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Some players understand that the spotlight doesn't shrink when it's shared. It expands. Sabrina Ionescu has lived that reality. She knows what it's like to be marketed, criticized, hyped, and dissected by the public. She also knows that none of it happens without attention first. That's why her reaction wasn't emotional. It was intentional. She didn't defend Caitlin Clark just because they were teammates that weekend. She defended the idea that the league works better when stars lift each other instead of undercutting one another. More eyes on one player don't erase everyone else. They bring new fans into the ecosystem. And that shows up everywhere. Bigger sponsorship deals don't just land on one doorstep. They ripple. More national broadcasts don't highlight one jersey. They raise the entire league's profile. Increased media coverage doesn't just follow a single name. It opens doors for stories that never would have been told before. Sabrina understands that. She's seen how growth benefits everyone willing to embrace it. Better exposure. Better opportunities. Better leverage when negotiations actually matter. Others still seem stuck in an older mindset. One where attention feels like competition instead of currency. Where recognition is viewed as something that must be divided evenly, rather than earned and multiplied. That gap in understanding is exactly why moments like the press conference feel so jarring. It's not just one comment. It's a clash between two ways of thinking about progress. And when you zoom out, that clash points to something deeper, something the league hasn't fully figured out yet. When you strip everything away, this wasn't really about Kelsey Plum or Caitlin Clark. It was about how a league responds when momentum finally shows up at its door. The All-Star Game was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became a snapshot of a growing pain the WNBA hasn't fully resolved yet. A league stepping into a bigger spotlight while still carrying old insecurities. Wanting the benefits of growth without always embracing the reality of how that growth happens. Caitlin Clark didn't ask to become the focal point. She earned it. Fans followed. Ratings followed. Money followed. And with that attention came pressure. Not just from opponents, but from inside the league itself. What made this moment stand out wasn't the criticism. Athletes deal with that every day. It was the contrast. One player quietly driving the league forward, even while sidelined. Others publicly questioning unity while benefiting from the very exposure they downplay. Fans see that now. They see who protects the bigger picture and who lets ego slip into moments that should be bigger than any individual. They see who understands that this isn't a zero-sum game, and who still treats it like one. And that's why this moment lingered long after the final buzzer. Not because of drama, but because it revealed something honest. Growth exposes everything. The excitement, the opportunity, and the fractures that were already there. Where the league goes from here depends on which voices get louder, the ones pushing it forward, or the ones resisting change. And if you've made it this far, you're clearly paying attention to those details. So if this breakdown helped you see the story differently, take a second to show it some love. Drop a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. These conversations only get better when more people are part of them. Because the game isn't just changing on the court, it's changing everywhere else too.